welcome back to First Trades. And, we were trying to reconnect with Aurodeep Nandi. He's back with us, the India economist at Nomura. And Aurodeep, hi, welcome back once again to the show. And my question to you earlier was that, we are estimated to have only an impact of about 2% to the GDP on the back of these US tariffs. But give us a realistic picture of what the wider spillovers could be. How could this impact our economy overall?
So I think it's important to understand that the tariffs don't apply to all the sectors which all that are involved in exports to the US. So, for instance, our biggest export item is smartphones. It's around 18% of the basket, which is not a part of this cohort. Pharma, which is around 11% of the basket, is not part of these tariffs. Similarly, mineral oils, so petroleum products, isn't part of it. Things like auto, for instance, is actually being taxed by 25% because it's under a separate category of Section 232. Similarly, iron and steel is already at 50%. So around 30 to 40% of the overall basket is somewhat exempt or is differently treated compared to this. Now, the hit is going to be for sectors that are in the front line. So be it things like textiles, gems and jewelry, food products, marine products, where, India facing a 50% tariff versus other countries facing, say, 19%, 20%, 10% tariff is an obvious disadvantage, which, so there's a direct hit there. The indirect hit comes from the fact that the US is an extremely important customer in these sectors. So you mentioned that the US is around 2% of GDP, the US exports. But the thing is that in these sectors, the US accounts for around 30 to 40% of the overall exports, which means that there could be a hit to employment in these sectors, both in terms of direct and indirect, the informal economy that relies on these sectors. And finally, the broader climate of when you have this kind of uncertainty on the external sector, then generally the investment sentiment is much weaker. So this private capex revival that we've been looking at for India may get delayed in the face of such uncertainties.
Aurodeep, I must say at the onset, that's a very Trump-inspired attire you have today. The red tie.
Right. That was completely unintentional. I didn't know if this interview at the moment.
I buy that. But tell me, Aurodeep, while there is the impact of tariffs on one hand, on the other, there is that significant government push. You've got the GST rationalizations. You've got, the renewed reform push right now by the government as well. And then, of course, so much comfort and ammo from the RBI as well. Can it really mitigate and balance out the impact of tariffs?
It's going to be a tough thing, right? So the government's approach towards this whole issue is that, look, we will not buckle under US pressure. And Prime Minister has said he's sort of talked more of buying Swadeshi, of protecting the interests of farmers and animal rearers domestically. So there's a lot of focus in terms of buying Indian-made goods. The other, as you mentioned, is this whole GST rationalization from 4 brackets, bringing it down to 2. So these and more importantly for GST, I think it's not just the rates that are being rationalized. It's also the whole ease of doing business around indirect taxation that is being targeted. Yesterday, we had Governor Malhotra say that they are ready to provide support to sectors that are hit. Government has been talking of trying to accelerate the talks on FTAs with other countries. Look, these are all there. How impactful they will be versus the negative impact from the tariffs is something that's something that we'll wait and watch. Usually things like efficiency reforms, right, will take time to start showing up in the economy. In the case of the GST tax cuts specifically, you also need to see how much companies pass on the cuts to consumers and how much that then impacts consumption. So there are various factors involved. As such, just based on all of this, our forecast for FY26 GDP growth is 6%. Down from our base case of 6.2%, primarily because of the shock that could come from all of this tariff tension.
Downward revision coming into the GDP estimate. But Aurodeep, we were talking about some triggers like the government push, the RBI assurance. Do you think all of these are enough to prevent any dampening of private investment sentiment? Because foreign flows, as we are seeing, are anyway lagging. So what happens to the investment scenario in the overall economy, given that we have this overhang now?
Well, I mean, I think that people will be watching how the data evolves for India. So the impact of these tariffs will possibly be visible in the September trade numbers. In the August one, there could be some front loading that still happens because exporters are expecting the 50% tariff later. So it's September where we'll actually get the real cost of these tariffs and really some more clarity in terms of, is India and the US bridging some bridges, or is it something that's not getting resolved in the near term, and that 50% tariffs are going to exist till FY26. So there is going to be some nervousness around that. There'll be some nervousness around how the economy reacts. People will be watching a lot the festive season to see how much the GST tax cuts are really boosting the economy, and how durable that boost is. But I think the broader point is that private capex in such a situation will take a backseat because companies will be facing a lot of uncertainty. Domestic demand as such has been relatively on the weaker side for India. So, all things put together, it's not a great environment for the investment cycle.
Okay, so that's on the investment cycle. But Aurodeep, help us understand what happens to these individual sectors and the kind of contribution that they have to the economy. Names like textiles, you have chemicals. Now, obviously, an immediate hit is going to be seen in all of these sectors, while normalization might take some time. But what happens to their contribution to the overall GDP, and how long do you think it would take to see some sort of recovery here?
So again, it depends a lot in terms of how long these tariffs last. See, 50%. See, when India was taxed to 25%, right, and the rest of Asia is at 20%, then or 19%, that delta of 5 to 6% wasn't that big a deal because an exporter sitting in India could offer a 5 or 6% discount to prevent that sort of demand evaporating away. But 50%, it's almost a 30 percentage points difference. It's not easy to just to give that level of discount, which means that there's a pressure. There'll be pressure on units for textiles, for gems and jewelry, for food products, for marine items, in terms of sort of how they negotiate, how they navigate around these. There is news coming in that a number of the gems and jewelry units are thinking of relocating to other low-cost locations where the tariff is lower in order to escape this kind of imposition. So, I think the bigger threat is actually to MSMEs, the smaller companies that don't have that much margin in order to to counter these kinds of tariffs. So, there is the issue in terms of how these firms are able to survive this. Then, as I said, there's the issue of the employment, people who are employed in the textile sector, in the gems and jewelry sector, in the, say, marine products sector. And then sort of the economies around these. I mean, a lot of cities are around these export hubs, right? And that has a sort of spillover effect in terms of consumption in the economy. So GDP is consumption, investment, government spending, and net exports. So your net exports is the first one to get hit, right? And then the secondary impact that you need to watch out for is what's going to happen to consumption as a result of this, and what's going to happen to investment as a result of this.
So what happens to the RBI action as a result of this then, Aurodeep? Do you see further easing in the year ahead?
Absolutely. We have 50 basis points of cuts further. So we have 25 basis points in October, and we have 25 basis points again in December. I think, look, the August meeting, it didn't really take into account much of the whole tariff tension aspect, right? And in fact, if you go through the MPC minutes that were released later, it certainly didn't indicate that MPC members felt that this pause is that they're done and dusted on rate cuts. In fact, there are two things which they are looking out for. One, they were looking out for what's going to happen on the tariff side. Will the 25% penalty be avoided? Will the tensions de-escalate, which has not happened? And second, they're looking at the transmission of the existing cuts that has happened. Has it gone through the economy? And I think clarity on both will be very well there by the time of the October meeting. RBI's GDP growth forecast is 6.5%, which we believe is an overestimate. Our estimate is 6%. Even on inflation, RBI has over 3% as their inflation forecast for FY26. Our estimate is around 2.7%. So there is an undershoot that's likely to happen both on growth and inflation. Plus, you have this shock that's coming into the economy. I think this is a great time to continue with the easing cycle. So we have our terminal repo rate is at 5%. So we expect 25 basis points cut in October and then again in December.
Okay, Aurodeep, appreciate your time and appreciate you joining us with your thoughts this morning. On that note, we'll let you go. Thanks so much. Okay, let's interact with the management of the newly listed Vikram Solar. The D-Street debut has just happened about